No one ever imagines that growing up with a famous last name can feel lonely, but for Rob Reiner's son, that loneliness quietly shaped much of his early life. From the moment people learned who his father was, expectations followed. Before he had a chance to discover his own strengths or flaws, the world assumed his future was already mapped out. And that assumption, repeated year after year, slowly became a weight he didn't know how to put down. Before we go deeper, remember to subscribe for more fame insights, because stories like this remind us that fame is rarely as simple as it looks. At home, Rob Reiner was a hardworking creative, passionate about storytelling and ideas. To his son, he was also just a father, supportive-driven, and deeply committed to his work. But outside those walls, the name Reiner meant something bigger. It meant success. It meant classic films. It meant standards that felt impossible to reach without comparison. Even as a child, he sensed that people expected him to reflect that legacy somehow. School became one of the first places where that pressure showed itself. Teachers reacted differently once they knew his last name. Some showed extra interest, others subtle expectations. Classmates asked about Hollywood instead of asking who he really was. Over time, he realized blending in would never come easily. Being ordinary felt like something other kids were allowed to be, but not him. As the years passed, he learned to stay quiet about his thoughts. Silence felt safer than explaining emotions people might misunderstand. While others assumed his life was filled with privilege and ease, he was learning how to carry a name that came with constant comparison. And long before he ever spoke publicly about it, that quiet internal struggle had already shaped the person he was becoming. As he grew older, the pressure didn't disappear. It simply changed form. Conversations with strangers often shifted the moment they heard his last name. Questions stopped being about his interests and became about his future, as if it were already written. People assumed doors would open effortlessly, but what they didn't see was how heavy those doors felt to him. Each one came with expectations he wasn't sure he wanted to carry. Compliments became complicated. Praise never felt simple, because it was hard to know where it was coming from. Was it earned, or was it inherited? That question followed him quietly for years. Over time, it created hesitation. He began second-guessing his own ambitions, not because he lacked ability, but because he feared being misunderstood. Instead of stepping forward, he often chose to step back. While the world assumed he was avoiding opportunity, he was actually protecting his sense of self. Silence allowed him space to think, to observe, and to exist without constant evaluation. To outsiders, his life looked comfortable. Inside, it was careful. He later admitted that the fear wasn't failure. It was interpretation. Failing privately is one thing. Failing publicly, with a famous name attached, feels entirely different. Every decision seemed amplified, every outcome open to judgment. That awareness shaped his choices more than he realized at the time. Years passed this way, quietly. No dramatic rebellion, no public rejection of his father's legacy. Just a slow, deliberate effort to find out who he was without the noise of expectation. And although he didn't realize it then, those quiet years would eventually give him the clarity to speak honestly when the time finally felt right. When he finally chose to speak, there was no dramatic announcement or attention-seeking moment. It came calmly, almost unexpectedly. What he shared wasn't meant to expose anyone or rewrite the past. It was simply the truth of how it felt to grow up alongside a celebrated legacy. He explained that pride and pressure can exist at the same time, and that one doesn't cancel out the other. What surprised many people was the tone. There was no resentment in his words, no sense of blame. He spoke respectfully about his father, acknowledging the hard work and passion behind the success. But he also admitted that being surrounded by greatness can make self-definition harder, not easier. Love doesn't always remove pressure. Sometimes it unintentionally adds to it. As his words spread, something shifted. The story stopped being about Hollywood privilege and started being about emotional reality. People who had never lived near fame began sharing their own experiences of growing up under high expectations. The response wasn't outrage. It was recognition. Many said they felt seen in a way they hadn't expected. Media coverage reflected that mood. Instead of dramatic headlines, the focus stayed on honesty and reflection. Commentators pointed out how rare it is for someone connected to influence to speak openly without trying to control the narrative. That authenticity gave the story weight. Hidden within what he said was a quiet realization: choosing a different path doesn't mean rejecting where you came from. Sometimes it means honoring who you are. And for many listening, that message mattered more than any headline ever could. As the conversation grew, experts began offering insight into why his words resonated so deeply. Psychologists explained that when someone is born into a well-established legacy, identity formation often takes longer. Constant comparison, even when unspoken, can delay confidence and make self-discovery feel risky. According to them, this isn't about weakness. It's about environment. In entertainment families especially, children often feel caught between continuation and differentiation. Following the same path invites comparison, while choosing a different one can feel like disappointment. Neither option is simple. What stood out in this case was the emotional maturity behind his reflection. He wasn't reacting to a crisis. He was speaking from understanding. Industry insiders added that stepping away from public visibility is often misread. Privacy is rarely a sign of failure. For many, It's a conscious decision to protect mental clarity and emotional balance. Not every meaningful life unfolds in front of an audience. Rather than diminishing Rob Reiner's legacy, this moment added depth to it. Great success doesn't exist in isolation. It affects families, relationships, and expectations in ways that aren't always visible. Acknowledging that doesn't reduce admiration, it humanizes it. As more people engage with the story, the discussion widened. Instead of asking why he didn't do more, audiences began asking what success actually means. Is it visibility or fulfillment, applause or peace? Those questions extended far beyond Hollywood, touching anyone who has ever felt defined by someone else's achievements. In the end, what Rob Reiner's son shared wasn't meant to shock or provoke gossip. It was meant to release a story that had quietly lived inside him for years. Speaking openly about growing up in the shadow of a celebrated legacy was an act of self-ownership. He wasn't accusing anyone or demanding the public's sympathy. He was simply reclaiming the narrative of his own life, showing that it's possible to honor your family and still find your own path. That subtle courage resonated far more than any sensational headline ever could. The impact of his words is subtle, yet profound. They remind audiences that fame is not just privilege, it's also responsibility, scrutiny, and expectation. For children of celebrities, it's not only about opportunities, it's about navigating the invisible weight of a name that comes before you. Even though the Reiner name opens doors, it also magnifies every choice, every misstep, and every quiet decision. This confession has sparked a conversation about the balance between legacy and individuality, a topic that rarely receives attention in the world of Hollywood fame. Fans and observers alike began reflecting on what it truly means to be born into influence. Some shared personal stories about feeling similarly defined by parents, teachers, or communities. Many related to the emotional struggle of carving an identity in spaces where assumptions have already been made. In a way, his honesty bridged a gap between celebrity culture and real life, showing that even those who seem to have it all face challenges of identity, doubt, and growth. Psychologists have noted that children in prominent families often experience what's known as borrowed identity, where the accomplishments and reputations of parents or guardians overshadow their own sense of self. Learning to navigate this requires patience, reflection, and eventually a willingness to speak your truth. By sharing his experience, Rob Reiner's son illustrated that stepping out from the shadow is not rebellion. It is a form of self-preservation, growth, and acceptance. It's about learning to honor the legacy without being confined by it. This story also subtly challenges the public's understanding of success. Most of us look at fame, wealth, and recognition as a straightforward advantage. But the reality is layered. Doors may open, yes, but they can feel heavier than any ordinary opportunity. Expectations can act as both guideposts and barriers. Every interaction, every glance, every conversation carries an unspoken question. Are you living up to the name? And the pressure to answer that question correctly can shape a lifetime of choices. Yet, through his openness, he also shows that personal fulfillment doesn't need to follow the blueprint of fame. It doesn't have to be loud, public, or dramatic. Sometimes the most meaningful victories are quiet, private, and deeply personal. He described how stepping away from the spotlight allowed him to explore himself, his interests, and his passions without comparison. That choice, though invisible to most people, represents courage, clarity, and self-respect.